That black folk in America in a world of trouble. You in a world of trouble in this country and in the world. And contrary to what you hear, I don't care whether it comes out of a black mouth or a white mouth, anybody that tells you that black folk are progressing in America is lying to you. You're lying to you. And right now, if we don't do some very specific things in America and in Baltimore in the next 3 years, not 200 years from now, but in the next 3 years, you are through in America. You're through. You're going to become a permanent underclass in 3 years. And an underclass means those individuals who, by the nature of their circumstances, will be forced to live as either beggars or criminals. That's where you're going. I'm going to say it to you again in case you missed that. Here in Baltimore and any blacks in America, you got 3 years to get your act together or you're going down. You're going to be forced to be either beggars or criminals for the rest of your existence. You got an unending influx of immigrants coming to this country. They're going to bury you alive. That bill they have right now in Congress, that is your tombstone. They're going to stick that up over your head. And any black person in this city that's shucking and jiving, they better get out of your way so you can get ahead, because bad things are coming.
What's up, YouTube family? Welcome back to MySpace. This is Evans Rayola. Guys, thank you so much for tuning to watch today's video. Guys, on today's video, we want to talk about black empowerment, and specifically in regards to economic empowerment. Dr. Claud Anderson says that black people, if we do not change, we shall become a permanent underclass in America. And this video is from a few years ago. Dr. Claud Anderson, a well-known black economist, author, and the former political advisor, has long warned that black Americans are on track to become a permanent underclass if certain systemic and behavioral patterns are not corrected. His key arguments are laid out in books like Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America and Black Labor, White Wealth. Here is a breakdown of this perspective, and before we break it down together, I want you to hear this video of Claud Anderson talking about this topic. Once the video is done, we will get back and do a critical analysis about the same. Let's watch this together, guys.
That black folk in America in a world of trouble. You in a world of trouble in this country and in the world. And contrary to what you hear, I don't care whether it comes out of a black mouth or a white mouth, anybody that tells you that black folk are progressing in America is lying to you. You're lying to you. And right now, if we don't do some very specific things in America and in Baltimore in the next 3 years, not 200 years from now, but in the next 3 years, you are through in America. You're through. You're going to become a permanent underclass in 3 years. And an underclass means those individuals who, by the nature of their circumstances, will be forced to live as either beggars or criminals. That's where you're going. I'm going to say it to you again in case you missed that. Here in Baltimore and any blacks in America, you got 3 years to get your act together or you're going down. You're going to be forced to be either beggars or criminals for the rest of your existence. You got an unending influx of immigrants coming to this country. They're going to bury you alive. That bill they have right now in Congress, that is your tombstone. They're going to stick that up over your head. And any black person in this city that's shucking and jiving, they better get out of your way so you can get ahead, because bad things are coming. This auditorium should have been full right now with black folk that understand the nature of your circumstances. And obviously all the teachers, your elected officials, your ministers are shucking and jiving in Baltimore. And when I say bad times are coming, it's because we are not focusing on what we're supposed to be focusing on. You've been intentionally misled and misdirected. You've been sent down the wrong road. And in comparative and proportional terms, we are exactly where we were as black folk in this country. We're exactly where we were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. You have not moved not one iota in 140 years. And people are shucking and jiving. What you're doing is enjoying the fruits of the social illusion by them telling you somehow that because you have social integration and civil rights that you have achieved something. We as black folk have achieved absolutely nothing with civil rights and integration. Any black person who got more than a third grade education should know that you had more. You had more before integration started than you got today. You've gone backwards. Now let me give you an example, and I say it comparatively speaking in 1860. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, in this country, you only had about 287,000 black people that were free out of almost 4.5 million. The other 4.5 million were enslaved all over America. Only 287,000 were free. And yet, out of those 287,000 black people, they had succeeded in acquiring one half of this nation's wealth. 1/2 of 1% of the nation's wealth. With only 287,000 free. Now here we are, 140 years later, in the richest nation on earth. 140 years later, you still own and control 1/2 of 1% of this nation's wealth. And contrary to what people keep telling you through a lot of civil rights leaders, civil rights and integration does not decide equal opportunity for you. You cannot get equality through civil rights and integration. What decides your opportunities in America is what you own and control. That's what decides your opportunities. You can have all the civil rights you want. You cannot go into an expensive restaurant or an expensive hotel if you don't have any money. They're playing games with you. You must own and control. And what they fail to tell you is that the whole process of slavery and Jim Crow segregation did not happen to black folk by accident. That wasn't any big accident. For you to wind up being enslaved for over 500 years in this country and 1,300 years around the world, that wasn't an accident. It happened intentionally. What your leaders should be asking is, why did it happen to you? Why were black folk enslaved all those centuries? For what? There must have been a purpose. If the purpose was strictly to maldistribute and misdistribute almost 100% or 99.5% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, businesses, and income, and controls of all levels of government. That was the purpose of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. So one group of people could live a very advantaged lifestyle, and these over here who are black would have nothing. That was the purpose of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. Now here you're talking about civil rights and integration. When did you correct it? If the other group controls 99.5% of everything and you control nothing, where is your equal opportunity? Where is your equality? Why are you sending black kids to school every day and people telling them that you're in an equalized society, a colorblind society, and you got nothing? You own and control nothing. I can come in this city right now and drive around. I'll bet you right now I can't find 2 blacks in this city that owns more than a 3-story building. Everything in this city that's high-rise belongs to whites. You don't own any bridges. You don't own any tollways. You don't own any airplanes. You don't own any boats. You don't own any skyscrapers. You don't own the media. You don't own the banks of any consequence. You own nothing. You don't produce anything. You wear clothes, but you don't produce any of any consequence. All you wear eyeglasses, you don't produce any eyeglasses. You don't own any hospitals. We own nothing. And just as happy as we want to be, go watch TV. Every black you see has been put into a safe category. The social illusion that's being created for you to dissuade you from doing something to save yourselves, they put a social illusion on TV with safe blacks. The images that are put in front of you show you that those are safe blacks. Any black that's successful in America has some kind of an illicit relationship with a ball. He's either running with a football, baseball, basketball, tennis ball, golf ball, standing on the stage telling jokes, dancing, singing, pretending he's having a ball. They even got a program now on TV called The Ballers. Because see, white folks know you're safe if you've got a relationship with a ball going. Because there's about that much distance between a cotton field and an athletic field. In the athletic field, you were chasing cotton balls. Now you're chasing basketball and tennis balls. You haven't moved one iota. The same person that owned the cotton fields now own the basketball teams and the football teams. We're not moving. 1/2 or 1% of the nation's wealth. That's what slavery did to you. It maldistributed everything in the hands of the dominant white society. As an example, you didn't acquire any wealth since 1860. Let me show you some other indications. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, almost 99% of all the black people in America, slave and free, was working for whites. Either in a white corporation, in a white business, in some white office, making wealth comfort for whites, on a plantation or whatever it is. We're not moving. 1/2 or 1% of the nation's wealth. That's what slavery did to you. It maldistributed everything in the hands of the dominant white society. As an example, you didn't acquire any wealth since 1860. Let me show you some other indications. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, almost 99% of all the black people in America, slave and free, was working for whites. Either in a white corporation, in a white business, in some white office, making wealth comfort for whites, on a plantation or whatever it is. Here you are, 140 years later, and again, 98% of all the black people in America work for whites. They either work in some level of government, white businesses, city government, state government, school teaching. Only 2% of all the blacks in America work in their own communities for themselves. Only 2% work for themselves. You haven't changed in 140 years. Let me try it another way if you still don't understand my point. On the eve of the Civil War in 1860, again, at that time, go and look at all the prisons in the United States and examine their records. I found out in the records, when I looked in the prisons in Savannah, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, Washington, D.C., looked at all the prisons, and I found out at that time, even though only 287,000 blacks were free, blacks made up over 51% of all the prisoners. You weren't even free and you made up 51% of the prisoners. Now I look around 140 years later, today, and I still find black folk make up over 51% of all the prisoners. Where have you changed? You don't own anything. You're still in prison. Still work for other people. You're enjoying a social illusion. Now you're fat and happy because we can go to someone else's restaurant. We can go to someone else's school. We can go to someone else's hotel. We can live in someone else's community. And we don't understand the negative aspects of that. That is a death sentence. And we don't understand what racism is. So what we are doing is committing suicide. We got 3 years ago before we go into it. 3 years ago, before you're going to see massive suicides happening. Because you don't even understand what racism is. I've gone all around the world. Even when I was with President Carter in the White House, I had to take trade missions in the third world nations, in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. And invariably, wherever I spoke, I would ask people, do you know what racism is? I would even offer $1,000 for a person to tell me what racism is. I still got black folk today who don't even know what racism is. They talk about it. Find me one that understands what racism is. Every time I ask him, what's racism? Well, Rock Anderson, racism is not liking somebody. It's prejudice, it's bigotry, it's hatred. No, it's not. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing for the ownership and control of wealth and resources and power. That's what racism is. Racism is a group phenomenon. Racism is a team sport. You cannot be participating in racism if you don't play as a team. You can't correct it. You're not even in the game. Racism is like football, basketball, and baseball. You play as a team or you lose. And I got all these so-called educated blacks in America on TV, heading up civil rights organizations, getting elected to public office. Don't you understand what racism is? That's why they don't do anything. They go there and tell you, well, I'm in a public office, I'm a mayor or governor. My thing is to make sure everybody get along. That's not affecting racism. Nobody asked you to get elected to office and make people get along. Now, racism never existed on the earth until the 1400s. Never had it. There was no such thing as racism. You had people, for instance, who had practiced various forms of discrimination. We even had slavery. But to be enslaved prior to the 1400s, for only three reasons. Either you were a victim of a religious persecution, or you had some indebtedness and was enslaved, or you were a prisoner of war. Those are the only three reasons you could be enslaved until the 1400s. About 1442, when Magellan, he went around, Henry the Navigator went around the coast of Africa and picked up about 16 blacks and brought them back in 1442 and gave them to the Pope as gifts. And those slaves worked around the Vatican in Italy from 1442 and about 1488. And it became a good thing to have all these blacks working free around the Vatican and in the Pope's space. No labor to be paid for. Other people wanted those advantages. So Pope Pius put out a public edict. Pope Innocent put out a public edict saying, look, if you want some slaves, go get some, but get black folk. He put out a public edict saying, if you're going to enslave anybody, enslave black people. And once that hit, all of a sudden everybody got interested in getting slaves. And that started the whole movement in 1488 and 1489. Now, something happened very important in 1495. Y'all know what happened in 1495? Allegedly, for this guy who was over here looking for drugs and some other thing. What was his name? Columbus. Y'all remember that guy? Now, he came over here and he supposedly discovered America about 7 years after the Pope had put out his edict using blacks as slaves. Now, all of a sudden, he goes back to Europe. A race started. All these countries got into a race to develop the Western world that Columbus said he had discovered. And what was the race about? They wanted to colonize and get resources, wealth, gold, silver, and cash crops from the West, because they never knew that the Americas existed. People in Europe never knew that there was a North America, Central America, and a South America. They got into a contest to explore it and to find it and profit from it. And because that time, prior to that, thank you, sir. Prior to that, the only, can you all hear me as well without this? Which one do you need? You need this one? Okay. So prior to that time, they had Europe all through the 1400s. Was going through what's called the Dark Ages. Europe was crime-ridden, impoverished, diseased, and they said we can resuscitate Europe. We can strengthen this continent, and we can find a way to develop the Western world, the Americas, Latin America, Central America, North America. If we can develop that country, we can bring ourselves out of the ditch as an European continent. And so they all said, well, how are we going to do it? They said, we need a labor class. So they all rushed down and picked up the Pope's edict and started grabbing blacks off the west coast of Africa. It was picking those blacks up on average about $25 a piece. And they started setting up, so they want a 1,500% return on their money. They started selling them for $400-some a piece. And so they started shipping blacks all into this country in Latin America and Central America to put them to work as a labor class. Now the countries that started at race, it started with Arabs. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk. I don't know if you all know that or not. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk, and Arabs have been enslaving black folk now for 1,300 years. Arabs first started enslaving blacks in 765 AD when they marched into Africa in what they called in search of the 3 G's, God, glory, and gold. And they pursued Africa until the 12th century when they overtook Timbuktu and Timbuktu fell, then they started dominating Africa. But the Arabs were the first ones. Portuguese were the second ones. Hispanics were the third ones. Then the Germans and the Danes. Then the French. Then the English. The Norwegians on down the line. Then lastly was the American Indians. Everybody's enslaved black folk. And that's what a race was. A contest started to develop the Western world. The rule was he who gets there first with the most slaves and make the most money will be the most powerful nation on earth. And the race began. Everybody was in the race to use. Everybody's enslaved black folk. And that's what a race was. A contest started to develop the Western world. The rule was he who gets there first with the most slaves and make the most money will be the most powerful nation on earth. And the race began. Everybody was in the race to use black folk except black folk. And began shipping blacks into America. And they shipped black folk in. They justified it initially by saying that it was an economic issue. Everybody knew it was an economic issue. It stayed an economic issue all the way from the 1500s up to the 1700s. In the 1700s, when the evangelical movement moved to this country, they switched enslaving black folk to make it a religious issue. Why? Because King James then wrote, when England took over the slave trade as the biggest one and started leading the slave trades and started winning the race, King James rewrote the Bible, called the King James Version. And even had what's his name now? What's the writer? Shakespeare and the rest of them writing. All of them rewrote the Bible. And they rewrote the Bible. Then since England was the dominating country for slaves, all the slave states were mandated to use scriptures to justify enslaving the black people. So religion then became a means of codifying slavery. Then the slave owners started teaching black folk that when you hear me talk about the master and the slave in the Bible, on earth, it's the white man is the master and you're the slave. And you're mandated to do three things. 1, to accept your station in life. 2, to be humble and obedient. 3, to work hard, don't steal and don't lie. And lastly, to look for pie in the sky after death. And that stayed true up until about 1880. At that time, religion was the justification for slavery. This is important for you now. Slavery then moved from being an economic issue to a religious issue. It stayed a religious issue up until about 1859, again on the eve of the Civil War. On the eve of the Civil War, a guy named Charles Darwin. Remember Charles Darwin? He wrote a book called The Survival of the Species, or The Survival of the Fittest. And what he's been doing, along with a lot of other pseudoscientists, was trying to connect a linkage between the lowest and the highest in life. What he was saying is that, is an amoeba that's that small, is it greater or smaller than an elephant that's big? Is a blade of grass lower in the chain than a tree? And they kept setting up these vertical systems. They call them genuses and species, going from the lowest of everything to the highest. But by that time, the white society had successfully redistributed by 1860 almost 97% of all the wealth and power into the hands of the dominant white society. The race was nearly over by 1860 or 1859 when Charles Darwin wrote his book. And they looked around and said, look, there are whites. Now let's get to human beings. We worked out the relationship between between a bush and a tree and an amoeba and an elephant. But look at the black. The black has nothing. He's on the bottom. And the white master's on the top. He owns and controls everything with all the education. So obviously the white man must be superior to the black man. And so then all of a sudden, racism and the whole issue switched. Slavery all switched from being a religious issue. It became a biological issue. When it became a biological issue, all governments mandated that you must put a person's race on his birth certificate, driver's license, whatever it is. It became a biological issue. But the race was over then. When the race was over, they looked around. And since whites had used slavery for so long, whites own everything. Almost 100% of everything. 99 to 1.5% belonged to the dominant white society. The slave owned nothing. The white was on top, the black was in a ditch. The race was over. When the race was over and blacks had nothing and whites had everything, the race ended. And what the society did then, they took the word race, R-A-C-E. They scratched the E off the end of race and stuck a suffix called ISM. ISM is a suffix which means keep the prevailing conditions, let nothing change. And that's where racism came from. The race was over. Whites wanted, they had everything. They took the E off the end of the word, stuck ISM, that's what racism is. Racism is a competitive relationship starting out to get wealth and resources and power. But what they teach you now is that racism has something to do with liking people, getting along with people. That's not racism. And when I ask people, I said, do you know what racism is? They say it's prejudice. You cannot eradicate prejudice. Everybody got a right to be prejudiced. All prejudice is you got a preconceived judgment or feeling about something based on previous experience. Right now, because of ice cream, I love burgundy cherry ice cream. So guess what? I'm prejudiced towards burgundy cherry ice cream. So now when I want some ice cream, I exercise my prejudice. I say I'm going to get me some ice cream, some burgundy cherry ice cream, because that's what I'm prejudiced for. Now I say, where am I going to get it from? I've gotten a lot of ice cream from a lot of stores, half of one worth a quarter. That's what Baskin Robbins has the best. So now I'm biased towards which ice cream parlor? Baskin Robbins. I'm biased to go there to exercise my prejudice. Now when I get into Baskin Robbins, I'll walk up and down the counter, looking at all the cherry mocha, the black chocolate rock, peppermint juicy fruit. I look at all that ice cream. And then guess what I'm doing now? Now I am discriminating. I'm discriminating against what kind of ice cream I want to satisfy my prejudice.
Family, as always, if you want to talk about black empowerment, especially economically, we cannot fail to mention the works of Dr. Claud Anderson. He says that black folks are not progressing in America. If we do not do certain things, we are going to be done in America. We'll become a permanent underclass. Underclass would mean, by the nature of circumstance, that we will be forced to live as beggars or criminals. Look at how bad things can be if we do not change how we do our things in regards to the economical side. You know, there's a lot of power that comes with economics. There's a lot of power that comes if people fully depend on themselves, if people are self-sufficient. If you're always dependent on somebody else, that day that person who you depend on doesn't show up for you, what happens? You'll be desperate, you'll be underclass. You know, that's the same ideology that Dr. Claud Anderson tries to educate with black folks all over the world. Here actually a breakdown of his perspective on why black folks would become a permanent underclass. Number one is the changing demographics. Anderson argues that by 2050, due to a massive migration and higher birth rates among other groups, black Americans will become a smaller percentage of the US population. This demographic shift may reduce political and economic influence if current trends continue. That shows us that black folks would be a smaller group in America by 2050 if all these things remain constant. The number two, the lack of economic base. He emphasizes that black people own less than 2% of the nation's wealth, despite being around 13% of the population. Without a strong economic foundation like ownership of the land, business, and industries, it's difficult to gain certain power. Family, many a times power comes with economics. Power comes with what you own. So Dr. Claud Anderson suggests that if we cannot be owners of lands, if we cannot own businesses, if we cannot own industries, then it will be difficult for us to sustain power or even to get power in America, in a white-dominated economic America. It will be difficult for us to get that economic base. We are lacking it. So we should endeavor to invest in buying lands, building up businesses, and also starting up industries. The number three is the political symbolism without substance. Anderson criticizes black political leadership for focusing on symbolic victories, like having black officials in high places without demanding economic tangibles in return for votes. The number four is the dependency on government and corporations. Over-reliance on external systems that don't prioritize black communities has led to chronic unemployment, underemployment, and lack of wealth transfer across generations. The number five is the no group-based agenda. Other ethnic groups practice group economics and push collective interest, while black Americans are often encouraged to be colorblind and assimilate, weakening community strength. So from these pointers, you notice that we should have a group-based agenda, as black folks, that we should put leaders, who can push our grievances, in the bigger stage. Then also, we should ensure that we actually have an economic base, that we can actually invest in properties in America for us to get this real power. Then some other thing that Dr. Claud Anderson insists in this video is why black folks should build up businesses. And here's what I found out according to my research. Number one is the economic independence. Business ownership allows communities to circulate money within themselves. Anderson argues money in black community lives within 6 hours, while other groups recycle it for days and weeks. Family, do you notice how deep that is? Our money stay within our community for only 6 hours, while other people circulate their income for weeks. We should improve in that. How can we improve? By starting up our own businesses in our communities so that we may be able to benefit by the power of the circulation of money. The number two is job creation. Black-owned business can employ other black people, reducing unemployment and dependency on others for opportunities. The number three is wealth creation and transfer. Owning assets like businesses enables families to build generational wealth rather than just surviving paycheck to paycheck. The number four is the control over communities. When you own businesses and properties in your community, you gain control over the culture, services, and resources, from schools to safety. The number five is the modeling success. Young people need to see examples of black ownership and success to build a mindset that doesn't rely solely on entertainment or sports. Many times you'll see black people thrive in entertainment and sports. Rarely do you see black folk dominate, the business sector, the corporate sector. They want to make us feel like we can only thrive in entertainment and sports. That's not the reason. The reason as to why we're actually failing, and the reason as to why Dr. Claud Anderson thinks that if we do not change, black folks will be a permanent underclass, is because we are not investing in businesses. It is because the few sole proprietors from the black community are not employing other black people. Another reason could be because we do not have enough businesses to circulate money within our communities. These are 3 but simple ways that we can be able, to gain power, not to be an underclass in America, in a whitewashed America. Dr. Claud Anderson has this powernomics plan, and here's what the powernomics plan include. It includes building strong black-owned businesses and industries, practicing group economics, creating an independent education system focused on practical skills, using politics to demand tangibles, not just symbolism, owning media and communication channels. Guys, thank you so much for tuning to watch today's video. I do not take your support for granted. Kindly like this video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users. Guys, I'd also request that you comment down below. Let me know on better ways that black folks can be able to grow, that black folks can be able to rise up to power in America. Last but not least, kindly do consider subscribing to this channel. We are currently on the road to 50,000 subscribers, and we cannot do it without your support. Thank you, and see you all in our next episode. Goodbye for now.